All right, here we go. Mastering. There's two different ways to do your mastering. One is just the generic way, which is you're mastering straight through the master channel and you have your plugins here and you have your final limiter here. Okay, that's the way you've probably always done it, but there's another way to do it, and this is how you set it up. You're going to create 3 empty audio tracks. You're going to call one of them high, one of them low, and then one of them pre. Okay, you're going to group the high and the low. You're going to take this high/low and you're going to route it to the pre. Okay, this is called your pre-mix or your pre-master. Let's close this down so you can see it. And then the master or the pre-master goes to the master channel. What happens on the pre-master? You would take stuff like all of these plugins, probably right here. All of these ones could go on this track right here. Okay, and then you would leave your final limiter on your master channel. Okay, now what you want to do is you want to go to your tracks and let's just say like the drop. Okay, there's 2 sections of the drop. Let's just say that, let's just pretend right now that the tags represent all the frequency ranges above 100 Hertz. So we would route that tag into the highs. Okay, I'm not going to do it, but just imagine I click this button and route it to the highs. And then let's pretend that group 25, which is our main sound in this instance, let's pretend that's our sub bass. We'd route that to the low. Okay, then we would go to, let's just say, the breakdown section over here, right? And then we'd go and we would find the instruments wherever they are that represent the this section here, the highs and the lows in this section, and we would route them, to the high and low channels. And that's how you want to break up all your frequency ranges. You can have certain things like low, mid, and highs going to your highs, or you can create a third chain that's going to be your lows, mids, and highs, however you want to do it. And then those would all get put into their categories, and you would do different EQs, compression, things like that on these individual tracks, and then you would limit those tracks, and then you would limit and master essentially the highs and the lows, just the instruments. You would master them essentially with like a final limiter or something like that here. And then you would send that into your pre, where you're going to do more limiting. A lot of times it's good to do multiple iterations of compression and limiting amongst different stages of your gain staging, just so that one limiter doesn't have to bear the weight of all the sounds together, which is the way I have it here in this instance. Okay, now the reason why I'm doing it like that is because I've already done that amongst the tracks themselves during the pre-production and the mixing stage. Okay, but if you're going to go with this method, you want to send your drums directly to the pre. You can also send your effects directly to the pre. Your vocals, this is our vocal track, needs to go to the master. Don't send the vocals to the pre. Directly to the master, okay? Then everything from here goes directly to the master. You can also send your effects directly to the master too if you would prefer. It's up to you how you do it. This is just one way to divvy up the tracks and then master those elements collectively amongst themselves here in a pre-master situation. Then all of those go to the master, and then you would put on your final limiter or any additional tweaking you need to do. Maybe you need to do more saturation. Maybe you need to do all of this again in this process, whatever you need to do. But the point is, you want to master it amongst themselves, like the frequency ranges. That's just another way to do it and organize your session. It's not how we're going to do it here. Let's move on. Okay. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take a listen to our section here with and without this chain. What's in this chain? We have a EQ. These are common frequency ranges I cut almost every single time. I find the rudimentary note or frequency range of the key. So in this case, the key is F, so I'm cutting around F here, and I'm cutting here around 300. We all know that's where mud sits. I'm using the mid-side EQ, and I'm cutting out everything just about below 95 hertz on the sides, and I'm rolling it off on the top. Then I have my compressor. I have a 30 millisecond attack, which is not a crazy tight attack because I don't want to do too much compression here, and a quick release. And I'm using a sidechain section here, and what this is doing is basically allowing the compressor to react to the frequencies above, well, in this case 200 hertz or just about 100 hertz. So the compressor isn't reacting necessarily to these low frequencies down here. It's reacting to everything above first. Okay, that's an important thing, because when your low end is hitting the compressor, it's probably going to hit it at a higher volume. So it's reacting at a different volume than, or a louder volume than the rest of your instruments. So it's really just reacting to the sub. So we don't want to do that. We're using this to tell it where we want the compressor to react to. Then we have a second compressor. This is the more important compressor, and we're actually doing a tighter compression around 10 milliseconds on this one, and we're boosting our gains to bring it up. We're also boosting a little bit on the gain here, and we're going to just listen to all these one by one and see what they do. But this is important because I'm using a universal audio device, and I want the analog warmth that comes with the universal audio devices integrated into the song. This is giving it more of an analog sound for our digital song. So I think that's a really interesting way to think of it, is like trying to add some bit of analog into the mastering, and I do it at this stage with this compressor. Now, because we're compressing all of those frequencies, I need to cut a little bit more again. We're actually cutting a little bit higher here, around 28 hertz. And this probably has to do with the fact that when you're compressing everything, it's bringing up a lot of that low end frequency. And you know, the less low end, the less you can forego in this area without hearing or noticing a difference, the better. It's going to make it easier on the speakers, and it's just like a frequency range that your ear isn't really hearing. It's just taking up, you know, space in your speakers and the frequency spectrum. So we're cutting it there again because we've compressed so much. And then we're protecting that low mids. It just too much low mids is not going to make for a commercial sounding song. And then if your highs are a little bit piercy, this is a good range, anywhere between 4100 and like 6K. This is where the sharper frequency ranges are going to be. And then we're just making sure to cut really everything above 17,000 kilohertz, but we're trying to do it in a rolled off situation here, so it's not just a straight hard cut like that. I don't want that, because you don't want to do hard cuts, you want soft cuts. So this is kind of helping that. This could probably benefit from Not a Brick Wall. Maybe something like that would be fine too. I'll just leave it like that. It's probably fine. So we're cutting those frequencies because we're bringing them back up with the compressor. So this is like a post compression EQ. This right here is a transient shaper. I'm using it because I just had bought the plugin and I like it. I wanted to try it. It definitely sounds better. And what this is doing is I am cutting. You can boost or cut. It's like a transient shaper almost, okay? And what I'm doing is I am suppressing the impact and the punch, and basically the impact, that's what it's called, of these frequency ranges. So I'm pushing it down here just above 5K, in between 5K and 250 hertz. I'm suppressing it lighter. This is letting this area come up more and be more upfront. And then below 250 hertz, I'm pushing that back down. So if you were to think of that, if you were to look at like a wavy line, this being, you know, here there's more frequency, and then here there's a little bit less, and then here there's more frequency again. I'm pushing this frequency down and this one down, and it's like a multi-band compressor, but it just is doing it differently. I don't know how else to explain it. It's pushing down the impact that those frequency ranges have. and it's helping me balance out the sound. And then finally, this right here, this is going to be like our like a soothe. It has different frequency ranges, and depending on the frequency ranges, it's cutting frequencies using a AI algorithm. I'm cutting those frequency ranges at a certain amount. How sensitive does it react to the incoming frequencies? I set it to this value. I'm just using my ears. I'm just, like it says here, you're taming the transients. That's the important thing to do, and it's to tighten the dynamic range. It says it right there. Okay, so how much in each area? This is a multi-band compressor. I'm expanding this range up to 3 dB. I'm using the internal signal frequency. I'm not sidechaining it to something else. I'm using its own frequency range. And what's going on here is, you see this band? So what it's doing is, when this frequency range is hitting, it's doing a balancing act between these frequencies in the low end and these frequencies here in the high and low mids. So you'll see it's pushing these values up to be more balanced with these low end frequencies. That's the best way to describe it, okay? And then last but not least, this is the big coloring of the sound for sure. Anywhere I set these, it sounds good. The way you set these frequency bands and how much you're pushing the width in this frequency spectrum will determine how your song sounds in the final result. And we're going to check these things out. I'm always doing these same similar things, monoing here, a little bump here in the low mids, high mids, a tiny bump. You could even do less in the high mids. You can even sometimes bump these low mids higher and these less, because the ear wants to hear these frequencies more than they want to hear these frequencies, and they definitely want to hear these frequencies. In the higher registers, you can push the high end wider, and it's cool. And then I'm using a little bit of stereo delay. It's an effect that they have. Makes the sound even more wide and three-dimensional. All this stuff is good. Let's take a listen to what all of these plugins sound like with and without. So obviously you're hearing a tightening, a balancing, a coloration, a width adjustment. There's so many things that happen. You're taking it from like a stale sounding song. Now it sounded cool before, but it didn't sound like a song. Now when you start doing these things, it starts to sound like a song. Let's go and A and B these one at a time. Let's bring them in one at a time. So first, let's do the EQ. And we're going to kind of just cruise through these. I don't need to break these things down. You know what these things are doing. We've talked about them. But let's just run through them. First, EQ. So you could definitely hear that we are bringing down these low mids to make the kick and the low mids, you know, a little bit more balanced. In this case, I can hear that the low mids kind of get a little bit more quiet than I probably would normally want them. But I know that when I bring this Pro C back, it's going to bring that dynamic range. It's going to narrow that dynamic range. Let's check that out. Definitely hear that squash. Also, notice when I go back and forth, turning them on and off, it takes a second for that compressor to kind of settle in and lock into where it's doing its thing. Just know that when you're turning on and off instruments. So again, we have just an average ratio. This is a 2.5 ratio average. I'm just finding a frequency threshold that I feel sounds good. Type, mastering, 30 millisecond attack. You could play with this. The way that your song sounds will be dependent on these two things. And I want a quick release. I don't want to squash the transient. I want to bridge the dynamic range between the peak of the sounds and everything in the valley. The peaks and the valleys. I am bridging those two together with this. Okay? And I'm doing it quickly. I don't want it to just squash it. I want it to just kind of grab it real quick and level it out. And then I'm boosting the wet gain a little bit here, okay, to bring back that volume. This compressor here, though, on the other hand, notice the difference in sound when I turn this one on. Okay, so the reason I like this compressor is because it not only brings up the volume, it's doing it in a way that gives it this warmth. It's like saturating it at the same time. I know it's not saturating it at the same time, but because it has this analog tone to it, it's giving it warmth, and I like that. I always use this plug. Or let's take a listen to this EQ. Okay, I think we're doing a really good job here. The purpose of this portion of the master is to start taming the frequencies. I do hear a slight adjustment in the tone of the bass, but it all gets leveled out here and here. So these moves are correct for the song, protecting the highs in the ears and the low mids for the low, muddy areas in the song. Let's check out this impact now. Remember, we are going to be cutting and taming the impact that these frequencies, the push that they have on the speakers. So I definitely can feel that the impact is helping us balance more back to where it's like an average. So without all these plugins on, we're getting a lot of the low mid beef. And then when you start putting the compressor and the EQs on, we're losing the low mid, and the brightness in the instrument, the main bass, is coming out more. And then this impact here is helping us average that out, so it's not just the top brittleness of that bass. It's helping us bring back a little bit of the meat of it, and in a nice way. And that's because we're cutting and we're pushing down the lows and the highs and letting the low mids have a little bit more room to breathe by narrowing the dynamic range between these three frequency ranges. This is something you could do with a transient shaper, a multiband transient shaper. You could do this with a multiband compressor. I'm using this plugin for this one track. Again, these are things you can also do in the individual tracks themselves if you want. So let's move on to the stabilizer. This is going to be just like using Soothe 2 or Gullfoss. So that stabilizer is doing such a small thing. It's just, double checking my work for me, making sure I'm crossing all my crossing all my T's and dotting all my I's. Let's move on to the multiband compressor. Again, let's take a look at where this side chain is taking us, okay? Like I said earlier, this is basically when this frequency range is hitting, it is expanding this frequency range about 3 dB to balance it with these two, or to balance it with one another. So that's why you saw it pumping like that, because it's hitting off the kick and the low end. And what it's doing is bringing up this frequency every time this is hitting. And this is helping the dynamic range every time the kick and the low end is hitting. The way you want to set this up, just do it the same way I did with these same settings here. You want to click audition, and you want to comb till it's like really just like the very end of the kick, like you're hearing the kick, but it's like the low end. That's what you want it to react to, and it's side chaining itself to that low end and boosting this frequency range. Very straightforward, very good tool, and handy to use. Now the imager is going to do a lot. We're doing widening, 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 and making more mono in these frequency ranges, and a little bit of a stereo effect. Check this one out. As you can hear, it's bringing up all the high fidelity and making this sound like a more commercially appealing track. If you were to do anything, the most important parts are going to easily be the compression and the EQ, the imaging. This is going to help your track sound great. And anywhere I place these, it's going to sound pretty good, but it's going to definitely change the way the song sounds. I'll even leave it like that for right now, because it sounds pretty cool. Pushing the highs and widening the highs is always okay. Just know that. Low mids, less, but is still okay above 100. You definitely want below 100 to be mono. Alright, so let's check out this limiter here. We really want around a 6.2, negative 6.2, I think was the reference I was going for loudness. So what I did is I brought in somebody else's track, and then I referenced the loudness of their track, and it was in the ballpark of the genre which I'm doing for this song. And so I want my song to have the same luffs as theirs. So let's just take a listen. So these are common settings that I use. And you notice when I played around with the attack and the release, we were getting different results. We can close this down because I was getting my targeted LF. I was getting my targeted LUFs here, which was roughly around 6.2. When I brought this over here, the whole song got way tighter. It sounded cool to me. It sounded really good. But it's just not what I wanted for this song. I wanted a more raw and loose sounding master. So I went with these settings. But maybe on your song it sounds a little bit different and those settings work better for you. When I played with the release, it also sounded good. I did though notice the further down, the quicker the release, the more distortion I was getting. Same thing with the look ahead. It's got a little bit of a distorted sound, but I like the way it sounds. Versus here, I was losing all the impact of the song when I brought the look ahead up. I always do this for the look ahead. I don't play with these too much, though you can play with them in your song and just see how they sound. A fun thing to do is multiple prints labeled which ones they are, and even A and Bing your settings is fun. But just try it out. The way that you set these values is going to dictate how loud, how quiet, how well the drums are punching, how big the bass is. All of these factors are on basically these two knobs. This one here too, but mainly these two knobs. Notice when I was changing this, the tone of the master changed. And you can use these, but they are very tonal, and I prefer a more transparent style mastering for myself. The last thing that I do when I'm doing my mastering is I'll set it to the highest, most CPU intensive setting because it'll sound the best. It'll give it the most accurate reading of, or it'll do its job the best. Okay, so this is like overpowering your limiter. So I always do the highest on the way out. I do a 16-bit dither, and then when I'm mastering it, when I'm bringing it out here, you can also do, not on top, but you don't have to do the dither within the Pro. If you're going to do it within Ableton's dithering, which is going to just blend those little edges together, just making it sound more professional, I use this one, the triangular dither. Before we wrap this part of the tutorial, I think what we should do is take a listen to the final completed version of the song so that you can kind of take in everything that we've learned throughout the tutorial, everything that you've seen me do, and envision those things that we've worked on and how it has resulted in the final sound of this track.
You can't touch brick wall, waterfall. Boy, you think you got it all. Bang, bang, choo-choo train. Wind me up, I do my thing. No pieces, 7-Up. Mess with me, I'll mess you up. Peace punch, Captain Crunch. I got something you can't touch. I got something you can't touch. Something you can't touch. I want something you can't touch. Something you can't touch. Pieces, 7-Up. Mess with me and I'll mess you up. 7-Up. 7-Up. Peace punch, Captain Crunch. I got something you can't touch. You can't touch. You can't touch.
Hopefully this has helped you improve your master. Maybe you're adding a couple of these plugins to your master chain and tweaking them to work with your song. Remember, these settings might not work for your song directly, but maybe a couple of these plugins will, and hopefully the insight you get from seeing how I'm doing my master will help perfect your master. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next video.